It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on traceability and UDI compliance in medical equipment manufacturing. This webinar is brought to you by Motion Solutions and Omron Automation Americas. If you have any questions throughout this webinar, I invite you to submit them through the question and answer feature. We'll get to as many of your questions as possible after the presentation itself. For those of you watching this webinar on demand, we invite you to reach out directly to the Motion Solutions engineering sales team through our website with your questions, and we'd be pleased to assist you and bring in Omron to support us as appropriate for your solution. With that, let me introduce myself. My name is Peter Hoffman, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Motion Solutions, and I'm pleased to be your moderator for this webinar. Motion Solutions provides custom application-specific engineered systems to OEMs and industrial customers in the medical, life sciences, semiconductor, and other automation sectors. We provide a complete selection of services including electromechanical design, prototype and volume manufacturing, and engineered services. With over 60 years of industrial experience, Motion Solutions is also a leading distributor of world-class linear motion and motion control products. It's now my pleasure to introduce our presenter for this webinar, Felix Klebe. Felix is a marketing manager at Omron Automation Americas, and he's responsible for sensors, advanced sensing products, including barcode readers, barcode verifiers, RFID systems, laser markers, vision systems, and industrial sensors. Felix has 25 years of product marketing experience in the area of factory automation equipment. Most recently, Felix was with Microscan Systems, which was acquired by Omron in 2017. It's really a pleasure to have Felix join us today and present this information. Felix is really an industry expert, and so we're delighted that he's able to join us. So with that, Felix, it's all yours.
Okay, thanks, Peter, and thanks everybody for taking the time to learn a little bit more about UDI and medical device labeling this morning and barcodes. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video so you can focus on the slides. First, we'll take a look at a little bit about Omron Automation. So who is Omron and how did we get involved in the area of UDI? You can see here some facts and figures about Omron, and as Peter mentioned, the way that Omron got involved, let's say with UDI and medical device labeling, was through the acquisition of Microscan in 2017. So I'm coming from the Microscan part of the business. I sit here at the Omron Microscan factory in Renton, Washington, just outside of Seattle, where we produce the barcode readers, machine vision, and the verifiers, which we'll also learn a little bit more about at the end of today's presentation. So let's take a look at our agenda today. Our agenda will take us through a high-level overview of the UDI labeling requirements as it relates to barcoding of medical device packaging, and in some case, the medical device itself. We'll follow that with a discussion on a few best practices for label inspection. Then we'll look at more broadly some of the benefits of implementing traceability beyond just for regulatory compliance, and introduce what we at Omron call Traceability 4.0. And then finally, we'll share some information on Omron hardware and software solutions that help manufacturers comply with the UDI mandate and achieve their other traceability objectives. So let's take a look at the high-level summary of UDI and barcoding. UDI, as many of you know, stands for Unique Device Identification and is an FDA mandate first implemented in 2014. It states that for any medical device sold in the US, there must be a unique ID number issued by an accredited or authorized agency and stored in an FDA database that's applied to the packaging or product labeling of medical devices. Details on what content, the type of barcode, the implementation date, and other information can be found in FDA-provided guidance documents. The reason for the mandate is to help ensure that in the event of a product recall or a field-reported problem with a medical device, There would be a centralized way for impacted parties to easily and quickly identify inventory throughout the supply chain. As we'll discuss later, beyond the regulatory compliance requirements, there are benefits to having strong traceability systems within a manufacturing operation. In order to deliver these traceability objectives, the manufacturer requires accurate and robust equipment that can not only read barcodes, but also check their quality to an ISO standard, as we'll learn, and inspect other information on the product or the package label. So let's look into a little more detail on the UDI itself. Fortunately, there are clear guidelines published by the FDA on what is required in terms of information on the product label to comply with the UDI mandate. The UDI final rule was published back in September of 2013, and it states that under the UDI rule, it must meet the requirements of 21 CFR Part 830.20, requirements for a unique identifier, as well as 21 CFR 801.40, which talks about the form of that unique identifier. And then finally, 21 CFR 801.40a specifies that the UDI must be presented in both easily readable plain text and AIDC technology forms on the label of the device and on the device package. The easily readable plain text form of the UDI should include the device identifier, which we also call the DI, and the production identifiers, which are called the PIs. While the UDI rule does not require the use of specific forms of AIDC, auto ID, or specific technologies to present the UDI, the AIDC form of the UDI should be in a format that can be read by a barcode scanner or some other type of AIDC technology. The labeler may choose to use more than one type of AIDC technology form to assist users who may be employing different methods of UDI capture technology. As an example, we could have on that label both a linear barcode and a 2D data matrix code. Some readers would only be able to read a linear barcode, such as a laser barcode scanner. Shown on this slide is information from the GS1, who is one of the 3 accredited issuing agencies for device identifiers. The chart cross-references terminology within the FDA UDI rule with terminology used within the GS1 standards. Within the issuing agency standards are guidelines that further detail the types of barcode symbologies that are acceptable for use. The FDA does not stipulate which barcode symbologies must be used. So that is within the GS1 standard. The type of information that's required for production identifiers varies by the class of medical device. For example, class 1, which is at the lowest risk, only requires a DI, with PI information being optional. 21 CFR 801.3 and 801.40 define which PI is required based on the class of the medical device. Let's look a little bit at who is impacted. Whoever is labeling the product, which can include a relabeler, such as a company that combines multiple medical devices into a kit, is one example of who is impacted. Importers are also impacted, as it does not matter where the device was produced. If it's sold in the US, then it must comply with the UDI mandate. Those who will benefit from a properly marked product include those in the supply chain, such as wholesalers and hospitals. Equipment used in a hospital or medical testing environment, such as an in vitro diagnostic device, is an example of lab automation equipment impacted by the UDI mandate. Certain electronic radiation emitting products used in medical applications meet the definition of a medical device. Examples are diagnostic ultrasound products, X-ray machines, and medical lasers. Looking a little bit further at medical device classification, as was mentioned earlier, both the timelines as well as the type of information that's on the label is impacted by what class your medical device falls into. The FDA helps manufacturers determine which class their device would fall into through their database, listing device types. It's a searchable database that you can see a link to at the bottom of the page. It's important, as I mentioned, due to the varying deadlines for UDI implementation and also some of the nuances of labeling requirements in terms of what information has to be on the label. So you can see here, large database, lots of different categories, and they are grouped into these 16 panels. Looking a little bit further at the deadlines, you can see that the deadlines for Class 2 and Class 3 devices have already passed. Upcoming deadlines remain for the Class 1 devices. While the focus of this webinar is the US, it's important to note there are similar UDI initiatives happening in Europe with implementation dates beginning next year. While there are many similarities in the requirements between the US and Europe, there are important differences, including that for Europe, a notified body must perform the compliance evaluation, which then provides the manufacturer with the backup documentation, which allows them to put the CE mark on the product and state that they are in compliance with the European medical device regulations. In Canada, there's a requirement for an identifier very similar to the UDI, giving a unique number that's assigned to the device by the manufacturer, along with the name of the device to be placed on the label. Let's look at a little bit more detail on the labels themselves. Here you can see some graphics provided by GS1 that explains the relationship between what's called a GTIN, Global Trade Identifier Number, the UDI, and the use of auto ID technology. Different GTINs are required for items which are individually packed and then put into a multi-unit pack, then finally a larger case package as shown on the graphic on the lower right of this slide. There are guidance documents from GS1 on best practices for positioning those labels such that they're easily read throughout the supply chain. As was mentioned earlier, the FDA has accredited agencies, organizations such as GS1, and so that device identifier is, in the terminology of GS1, what we refer to as a GTIN. Looking a little bit more detail about production identifiers. As was mentioned earlier, production identifiers for Class 2 and Class 3 devices are commonly required. Here are some examples of the types of information that's embedded for each production identifier. In the case of GS1, they use a terminology called AI, which is an application identifier, to denote these production identifiers. I know we're going through a lot of acronyms. It's important to become familiar with them. So those AIs are assigned to each of these data elements. So let's take a look at a couple of example labels to get a better handle on what this might look like. Here you can see a typical label that has a combination of human readable and encoded information within a 2D data matrix barcode. The DI is always at the beginning of the data string, and as it was mentioned, is called the GTIN in the GS1 terminology. And now it's followed by multiple AIs for the production information. Each AI has a 2-digit identifier that's specified within the GS1 general specifications. Looking at a second example, you can see more clearly the PI information on the upper right next to the barcode. 01 is the GS1 identifier for the GTIN, or the device identifier, followed by the 17, which is the manufacture date, the 10, which is the lot number, and then 21, which is the individual serial number. Note that the date format that's encoded in the barcode is not required to have the same format as the human readable text. So the FDA does mandate for human readable a 4-digit year, but in the case of the barcoded information, you can either use the 4-digit year or the 2-digit year as shown. There's not a minimum font size for human readable information that's specified by the FDA or GS1. However, the FDA, through their labeling standards, 21 CFR 801.15, state that text must be prominent. So although that's somewhat of a gray area statement, in an audit or other situation where there is a complaint about unreadable text, the FDA could fall back upon that regulation if the font becomes too small to be easily legible. Okay, let's turn a little bit onto some specifics around the barcode requirements for UDI compliance. So here are some FAQs. I've touched on some of these already, but we can take a quick look back through them. As was mentioned, the FDA requires that the UDI info be available both in auto ID as well as human readable forms on the product label. There are different types of acceptable barcodes, and you can find that information within the GS1 general standard. So those could be a data matrix 2D or a type 128 1D code. Was mentioned it could be either in 1D or 2D or an RFID tag. We'll talk about RFID in a moment, but in general, we're not seeing a lot of RFID be used in these types of applications at the unit level. The DI must come first in the data stream, followed by the PI. We touched on that. The UDI should be on every level of packaging except for logistics unit. And for a class 1 device, and those aren't yet impacted, a UPC number could serve as the UDI. However, it still must be registered in the FDA database, the Good ID database. Okay, let's take a look at an excerpt from the GS1 general specification. So I've mentioned the GS1 general specification a couple of times. What is the link between UDI compliance and barcode quality? That's drilling down a little bit into the details. GS1 defines in their general specification several important requirements for barcodes for companies using GS1 as their DI issuing agency. I will point out here that GS1 has by far the highest market share in the US, with I believe over 95% of all medical devices registered in the Good ID database having a DI that was issued by GS1. So what we're looking at here is way back in the general specification, towards the end, the tables. So in the case of medical devices that are labeled, GS1 Table 6 is relevant. So what we're seeing on the left side of this slide are the different symbologies that are allowed per GS1. So as I mentioned, the data matrix is possible, or the GS1 128 and some other codes as well that you list here. So the rest of this table gives you important information when it comes to the label design. So you have a minimum we call X dimension. So this is the narrow bar width. So on a 1D code, the vertical bars and spaces, the narrowest of those are what we would define as the X dimension. Then you can see over a little bit further to the right, the allowable barcode sizes. So the minimum size for the overall height and width of the code. The quiet zone, so that's the free area without other text printed to the left and to the right, or for 2D above and below the code as well. And then over all the way on the right that I've circled in red here is the barcode quality. And what's important to note is that we have a global standard, ISO 15415 and ISO 15416, that defines how to measure barcode quality. And GS1 has information that goes into detail of the calculations. You can see here a few numbers. So the 1.5, that first number that's over to the left of the circled red field, that is the barcode quality, the minimum barcode quality of a 1.5. The next two numbers have to do with the aperture and the wavelength of the light, so it has to do with the testing conditions. In general, within the GS1 world, RFID without a barcode is not acceptable. So although you can use RFID, there must also be a barcode on the label. Okay, let's move on in terms of barcode verification. So I talked a little bit about that quality that's required in ISO 15415, ISO 15416. So verification is a method of analyzing a printed barcode against a published specification. That's the ISO standard. And when we talk about verification, we're looking not just at the quality of the barcode, but we're also looking at the data structure. So you may recall earlier we had that string of information with the DI and the PIs, and GS1 has very specific codes that you saw earlier for the lot number, the serial number, the date code, etc. And what we're checking with the verifier is to make sure that the structure is compliant with the GS1 general specification. So we're checking both the quality of that code to these ISO standards and the data format to the GS1 standards listed here. So contrast that with a barcode reader or scanner. A barcode reader or scanner, all it will do is tell you that, yes, this code is readable with that particular barcode scanner. It does not give you any information about how easy it was or difficult it was to read that code, what the quality of the code is, or is the data structure that it read compliant with the GS1 requirements. So benefits of barcode verification. Why are we doing this? Well, it's certainly part of a label quality control process that is required by the FDA. So the FDA does not tell you, you need to verify every label or verify at a 3% rate. But what it does say is that you must have a quality control system in place around medical device labeling. With a barcode verifier, you are archiving that testing. So you get a test report that you can archive as need be, and then use that for audits or other purposes to show conformance to some of these quality inspection requirements. And then importantly, it also helps pinpoint the cause of label design errors and poor print quality. So the whole goal here is not just to make sure we're compliant, but is to improve the quality of the product, and labeling is a very important part of that. All right, let's move a little bit into some best practices around label inspection. So first, we've talked about verifying, and when should we verify? Well, there's a few points in the process here that we find successful manufacturers are using verification. First, in the initial label design, we want to be able to identify, very early on potential problems with our label design, including the barcode design, such as that incorrect data structure. What are some sources of potential quality problems in producing that barcode? So the quiet zone, poor contrast, maybe too small of a barcode size so that we're not going to reliably be able to read that barcode throughout the supply chain. So that's important in the initial label design, that we use a verifier to confirm that what we've designed is going to work well in production. And then we move over to the prototyping, where we're possibly printing some labels on the equipment that's actually going to be used in production. Now we have a better handle on issues such as poor contrast based off of the colors used, the type of label media, whether it's reflective or a darker label media that may cause that poor contrast, and so forth. And then finally, during production. So this is where we're assuring that a product that's going out the door is complying with those GS1 requirements for quality and data structure. Could be at the beginning of the label run, at the end of the label run, or a combination of those, or inspecting at 100% level to make sure that every product that's leaving is compliant. So this next slide has a short graphic which outlines that process. Sort of a closed loop. At step one was the label design. Step two was the prototyping that we talked about in the previous slide. Step three is moving into production. And then step four is taking some of that production data after we've produced hundreds or thousands of labels and analyzing where we're running into quality problems. And then potentially, if it's serious enough, going back and adjusting the label design back at step one. So we have a variety of solutions which help you work with each of these steps in the process. So what are some causes of barcode label and label content defects? We've touched on the design aspect and a little bit the using of poor contrast, whether you've got the example here of yellow on white. But in production, things change, right? So at the beginning of a roll of ribbon, everything looks good, but you then as the ribbon starts to get old, you start to have issues with quality. Ribbon wrinkle is a potential cause in a thermal printer. In a inkjet system, you can have clogged inkjets. The label substrate may not be consistent. So the first roll or two that was used of a print media maybe was fine, but then something happened with the supplier of that print media, and now you're getting some defects. So, a variety of things that can happen throughout the production process that may cause issues. Labeling is one of the largest sources of recalls, both in medical device as well as pharmaceuticals. So it is a reality that there are issues around labeling that cause product recalls. So looking a little bit more at, when you're implementing an inspection system, what are some pitfalls? So we've seen manufacturers who maybe are using a very narrow or fine font that becomes difficult to consistently print legibly with adequate boldness. So the operator then may turn up the heat settings, for example, on a thermal printer, and that would result in overprinting or smudging of the barcode or other information on the label. I've touched a little bit about the substrate or the media, and what's important to note is that there's specific recommendations from printer manufacturers such as Zebra or Sato or others that recommend specific print ribbon to use with specific media. So you may need a different ribbon with a different style of label based off of whether it's a glossy or polyester versus a more of a matte. And if you're using the same ribbon for a variety of different label styles, you could run into some trouble. Using low resolution printers. So we find generally that 300 or 600 DPI printers result in the most success. As you start to use smaller resolution 2 or 3 DPI printers, and you combine that with small X dimension barcodes or small font, you're getting poor quality, and you end up failing a lot of labels when it comes to minimum barcode quality. And then finally, over inspecting. So we do have some of our products the ability to look for blemishes on the label, and if you set that threshold such that every small blemish is kicking out an error, it can slow down production and become very frustrating. So making sure that you are only inspecting for errors that truly are having a significant impact on label quality is a best practice. Okay, we haven't talked about direct part marks, but there are a class of medical devices, what we call reprocessable, or those that are sterilized and reused again, where direct part marking is very common. So these are some photos of products, so you can see here, scissors and so forth, where you would typically use a direct part mark and a laser etch. So in the case of Omron, we have a fiber laser marker, which can apply at a very high resolution a small data matrix symbol. And it's important to note that for this type of device, human readable is not required, unlike the product labels. So these would often just have this data matrix barcode. And unlike label printers, you can have problems with your direct part mark methods that result in issues here and ultimately degrade the quality of the product, and you need to be able to catch that through a inspection process. I didn't mention it earlier, but there is a different standard, ISO standard 29158, and a different table within the GS1 specification, table 7, which is used for direct part mark inspection and compliance. Okay, let's move over to the broader topic of traceability and what we at Omron call Traceability 4.0. So I think most people are aware of the buzzword and move towards what we call Industry 4.0. That's been going on for a number of years. And you can see some quotes here more recently about traceability being an important part of, let's say, moving your organization to Industry 4.0. So, what is traceability and the evolution of traceability, and what do we mean by Traceability 4.0? Those of you who've been around barcodes know probably that the inception originally of barcodes was back in the 70s, and it was more in the retail space. The original barcode was, I think, on a pack of gum somewhere outside of Dayton, Ohio, and that was just giving, enabling, we'll call it e-commerce, so information exchange between the wholesaler and the retailer. What that has evolved to in Traceability 2.0 was supply chain visibility. So improving lean manufacturing as well as inventory management throughout the supply chain. As we move into Traceability 3.0, this got us more into the factory floor with what we call item level visualization. So production efficiencies, tracking of inventory within, let's say, the walls of the factory, et cetera, at the line item and unit level visualization. And now what is 4.0? 4.0 is around process visibility. So this relates to the terminology big data. And what we're trying to do here is to tie production information with the ultimate, the quality of the product. So we're looking at the machine level, at the operator level, at the tool level, how are the quality parameters of the product. So if we're 100% testing a product, the example would be at our label printing operation, we may start to get a very good feel for if there's 10 label printers, which one is producing the best quality, when was the last time it was maintained, what types of barcodes are giving us the best quality. So it's basically taking a lot of information and improving our ability to fine-tune the process to improve overall product quality, reduce rejects, et cetera. So this is really where we're at today with traceability within the walls of the factory. So what we find here as we've been out talking with manufacturers is that the more enlightened manufacturers, you can see a lot of the industries here, are using this unit level traceability to improve their overall business long before or even in addition or beyond what some of the mandates like the UDI initiative is requiring. So we want to just encourage that as you're putting traceability into your operations, you're making the investment in the hardware and the software. Let's see, beyond just complying with the UDI mandate, what else can we do to benefit your operations around traceability within the walls of the factory? Okay, let's spend a moment talking about some of the Omron solutions. So you can see here some photos of different products. Some of them are very focused around UDI, others are more broadly focused on traceability. So portable barcode verifiers, the left side you see on the lower left, we call barcode verifier, and it's typically a handheld or a desktop type situation where we're verifying the information on the individual label. A print quality inspection system is the image right above it, which shows a Zebra ZT600 series printer. What we have in this product is a line scan camera right at the discharge of this printer, or you can see the label coming out. And we'll spend a moment talking about what that all can give you. So that's what we call an inline 100% inspection system. So we're inspecting every label as it's produced. Over on the right, we have just your typical fixed barcode readers. We also have handheld barcode readers. On the upper right, RFID systems. So we didn't talk much about RFID as it relates to the UDI initiative because it's not commonly used, but when it comes to traceability, we are using RFID within the walls of the factory and often at the case level to monitor products maybe entering one production area versus from another production area. And Omron is active in the RFID reader and tag business. Vision inspection systems, this is more broadly looking at the quality of a product. So we've spent a lot of time looking at labeling, but what we haven't talked about is, are all the pieces of that medical device in the proper location? Is a screw fully inserted, whatever it might be. So vision inspection, and you can see one of our newer smart cameras up here on the right, or towards the top rather, lets you look at all the detail of a product and make sure that it is compliant with, let's say, a golden image, or looking for any defects beyond what we're talking about on the label itself. And then finally, laser markers. So I mentioned earlier for direct part mark that there is a technology called fiber laser markers. Omron does offer fiber laser markers, and it can make very, very small marks, actually a smaller legible mark than you would with a typical barcode printer, like a thermal transfer printer. Just a little bit more detail on the verification report. So on the upper left, when we use that handheld verifier, this is the information you'll get. So you may recall when we were looking at that GS1 standard, those 3 numbers separated by the backslash. So the overall grade of 2.6 in this case is better than the 1.5. So gives you that assurance that you're complying with the GS1 minimum requirement, and gives you the view of the actual label. And then down below is sort of an excerpt from the printed report, or the report that you'd archive to a PDF, or you could export this data in a flat file for putting it into a database with all of the detail. So the ISO standards have a lot of information about how to grade a barcode. And on the lower left, you can see a lot of these parameters that end up being checked automatically by the barcode verifier. So that's the software piece that is doing all the hard work for you automatically and making you aware of any areas that you may have a problem. On the upper right is a little bit around the analysis side. So this is what we call a 2D, or I'm sorry, an analysis, dimensional analysis, showing the reflectance difference between the dark lines in a barcode and the white spaces. And as long as we're crossing this horizontal line called the global threshold, we are getting adequate decodability and we call modulation or edge contrast. So if you were to have a trouble with a barcode, you would be flagging areas through this analysis where the problem might be, and allowing you to make an adjustment in your production of that label to eliminate the problem. So wrapping it up here, what are some further resources that you can go to in order to learn more? Well, the good news is that both the FDA as well as GS1 have a wide variety of documents out on their sites, and they're all free, where you can learn more. So I've put some links here. Peter will be sending the presentation out so you can access these links. And there are many, many more documents that you can use to help you understand some of those requirements. On the Omron website, you'll find some product-specific information. So I put a link here to one of the most popular verifiers, the LBS 9585, that lets you verify both the printed labels as well as those direct part marks. So if you're using direct part marking on your products and labels, you then have a single product. And Omron does offer assistance both from application evaluation, so working with Motion Solutions and some of the local Omron experts, you can have someone come in and demo a product for you and discuss in specifics some of what your needs are. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up and open the webinar up to some questions.
Fantastic. So first of all, Felix, I want to thank you for your really thorough and interesting presentation on this really important topic. If you have a question, we have a few minutes left. Please go ahead and ask your questions, and we'll get to as many of them as we can in these last few minutes that we have available. So Felix, I have a few questions that have come in that let me send your direction. The first is, if the regulations change, do I have to purchase a new piece of hardware from your company?
That's a great question. One thing I would point out is that the GS1 standards are updated annually. So within those GS1 standards, you may have a change on an annual basis to some of those application identifiers that we looked at earlier. Omron does update our software to reflect the latest GS1 standards, and we provide those software updates at no charge. So from staying current with the GS1 standards, the answer is no. What's difficult to foresee is regulations, maybe from the FDA or somewhere else, that would be more far-reaching, that may require potentially different hardware. An example would be, today, for example, with our 9585 verifier, we can verify a 6 mil X dimension quite comfortably on a printed label. We do have another version with that goes down closer to a 3 mil X dimension. If you had purchased in the past the version that had the 6 mil X dimension, and FDA for some reason or GS1 said, okay, we're now going to allow you to go down in our standards to a 4 mil, in that case, you may have to go back and purchase a different verifier, but that is not a very likely scenario. So I hope that answers that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Felix, in the presentation, you mentioned European standards, and a question came up, if I meet the USA UDI requirements and I'm shipping to Europe, do I need to meet the EU regulations?
The answer is yes, and the important thing is that the EU regulations, although very similar, are separate from the US. So if you've registered with the FDA your products, that does not allow you to just ship these to Europe and say you're compliant with the European regulations. So the process is you have to work with a notified body, someone like TÜV or BSI, who is essentially taking your file of information, perhaps doing some testing, and then issuing a test report that let you put the CE mark confidently on your product. So you do need to go through that process separately for Europe.
Very good, thank you. A couple more questions I'll try to get to in the last few minutes. What's the approximate cost of a label verification system?
Yeah, so it varies by what you're trying to do. We have, as is shown, the all-in-one system with the line scan camera built into the printer. So for 100% label inspection, inspecting every single label, those are in the range of $20,000 for the hardware and the software, and we do offer as well installation services on top of that. And then for the standalone, we'll call it the offline system, lets you with the handheld device spot check labels. Those are in the range of $7,000 and below for a system that includes both the hardware and the software.
Okay, thank you very much. One last question, and we'll call it a wrap. Is training a part of the purchase? And if not, do you offer training on how to use your label verification system?
Training is typically a separate line item that's quoted, and it depends on the extent of the training. The inline system with the printer is more involved, and we would always recommend that someone include the training as part of that to make sure it's a successful implementation. And for the offline handheld unit, we do offer training both in person and remote, and that can be quoted through Motion Solutions.
Fantastic. So we're at the end of our time. I want to thank again Felix and Omron for being such an exceptional partner with Motion Solutions. Felix, we appreciate all the time you put into doing this webinar. It was some fantastic information. If anyone would like more assistance with their implementation of UDI and traceability, please contact Motion Solutions and Omron. We look forward to being able to assist you. Again, this webinar will be available on demand through our website. So thank you very much, and we hope you have a good rest of your day.